If you were to try and sum up Manchester United's situation right now, you only need to look at the current media landscape. Every reputable pundit, analyst, and even normal people with good footballing opinions are picking this squad apart. YouTubers are cramming as many terms like downfall, critical, failure,
and so on, and so on, and so on, etc.
into their thumbnails, alongside a copious amount of flames, tears, knives, and whatever the hell else thumbnails are made out of nowadays. And the gold bridges of the world, they are screaming at the top of their lungs that this club is doomed. With just 26 points from 22 games and a -5 goal difference, United are currently sitting 13th, just 10 points shy of the drop. The problems are starting to spring up across the club as well, from the playing squad, which now looks like a depression quilt of players signed by different managers, each in various states of being broken by this club who seems to ruin players, to the ground which is in dire need of repair. This wouldn't look so bad if the funds were there for a rebuild of the squad to go with a new manager, but from an FFP point of view, the January transfer window will resemble a Russian dinner on a stormy night in the 80s, somewhere in Siberia. Amorim is apparently considering extending Harry Maguire's contract as the club, quote, is starving for leaders on the pitch, and as for the facilities, which haven't seen anything meaningful in terms of modernization since the Fergie era, let's just say that a club that has been posting losses season after season can't really dream of a new stadium, no matter how much Ratcliffe glazes up his fellow Lizards Musk or Bezos on Twitter. The prospect of a club like Manchester United getting relegated seems beyond the realms of possibility in most cases. But a decade of mismanagement has now made this quite real. Amorim has been quoted as saying that the prospect of relegation is the quote shock Manchester United need, but I will go a step further and say that relegation might actually be the biggest footballing shock of all time. If we take away the massive loss of revenue and the exodus of stars, which has already started if we take into account Rashford's current situation, and the club's apparent eagerness to sell its most prized youngsters, relegation might sound like a clean slate for such a toxic club. And seeing as time is cyclical or whatever Ross Cole used to spout,
this is fear.
Yeah, okay, you sweaty weirdo. So if we are to prepare for such an eventuality, let's cast our gaze back into the past when Manchester United last got relegated and see what might happen if the second tier of English football will be graced by arguably England's biggest club once again. Manchester United are no strangers to relegation, since the early days of the club were marked by mediocrity and stints in the lower leagues. A reversal of fortunes and a change of name from Newton Heath to their current name saw them crowned champions in 1908 and 1911. But the interwar years brought further relegations and a very close call with third-tier football when United saved themselves by beating Millwall on the final day of the season. Having gained promotion just before the outbreak of World War II and suffering extensive damage to their stadium through German bombing raids, the club appointed Matt Busby as manager in 1945. Busby was only 36 at the time, was a former Liverpool and Manchester City player, and demanded unprecedented levels of control from the club when he was appointed. Such was the desperation to regain their status as one of England's premier football teams that the club accepted. Busby overhauled the squad, promoting several youth players from the Manchester United Junior Athletic Club, which had been founded in 1938 with just that goal in mind, and got rid of many of the older figures. The result was a team with an average age of 22 that lifted the FA Cup already in 1948 before being crowned champions in 1952. The 1956 and 57 seasons were the high water mark of this team, dubbed the Busby Babes, as they won back-to-back league titles and reached the semi-final of the newly established European Cup. In that season of Europe's premier competition, the top two goal scorers were Dennis Viollet and Tommy Taylor with 9 and 8 goals respectively, from just 4 games. The world's press were in love with the young English team, and many were tipping United to push perennial winners and favourites Real Madrid all the way in the 1958 season. In the league, United were third, just 6 points behind league leaders Wolves, and were looking to defeat Red Star Belgrade in the European Cup quarter-finals. Having overcome the Serbian side, the plane carrying the United players and staff from Belgrade back home stopped to refuel in München. After 3 unsuccessful takeoff attempts, and with snow building on the runway, the plane skidded off the tarmac and crashed into a house, killing nearly half the passengers on board, including many of United's brightest talents. Busby himself was severely injured, but made a miraculous recovery, and when he returned to his team, started the arduous task of rebuilding a squad that had lost some of its best talents. Having lost Duncan Edwards, considered a future footballing superstar, Busby could still rely on Bobby Charlton, and with the addition of Denis Law in 1962, a new golden generation was starting to form. The club abandoned the Busby Babes moniker, and around the same time, the Red Devils identity began to form. Despite finishing 19th in the league in 1963, they managed to win the FA Cup before coming in second the next year. Their immediate reversal of fortune was helped by the addition of the last member of the so-called Holy Trinity, George Best. The most successful period in the club's history so far would follow between 1965 and 1968, winning 2 more league titles and the 1968 European Cup at Wembley Stadium. However, in 1969, Matt Busby announced plans to retire, joining the backroom staff of United and naming Wilf McInnes, the reserve team coach, as his successor. In a situation we are surely all very familiar with, the proposed successor to a Manchester United manager that had been at the club for 24 years faltered under the pressure of living up to his predecessor. With the old manager looking down from the stands and an aging squad, some of which had known only one manager for most of their careers, the task seemed impossible, much like the one given to David Moyes. Busby returned on an interim basis to the team, managing to save them from relegation and finishing 8th. A further 8th place finish under Frank O'Farrell followed, with brief glimpses of quality amidst a seemingly sinking ship. Much like when United were courting every manager in Europe before allowing Ten Hag to stay another season, O'Farrell hadn't even been the club's first choice, as approaches to European Cup winner Jock Stein of Celtic, Football League mastermind Don Revie of Leeds, and Dave Sexton of Chelsea having been made. The next season would be even worse, seeing United enter a relegation battle which cost O'Farrell his job. Scotland manager Tommy Docherty was announced as the new United manager, Charlton retired aged 35, and George Best was becoming increasingly erratic as his alcoholism truly began to affect his playing career. He had already announced his retirement in 1972, aged just 26, before immediately backtracking and then retiring again in 1973. Docherty managed to keep United barely afloat, finishing 18th, as he signed a series of new players. Out of the new recruits that came in during these years, just 2, centre-back and captain Martin Buchan and future club legend Lou Macari, could be considered successful. George Best once again came out of retirement to play for the club in the 1973-74 season, but the most devastating blow came when Denis Law signed for arch-rivals Manchester City on a free transfer. United were 13th after the 4th match week, but it was all downhill from there, and the club were firmly in a relegation battle, picking up just 4 wins in the next 20 league games. Best played the last game for the club on New Year's Day 1974, and with that, the last member of the Holy Trinity had left the club. Manager Tommy Docherty started asking his players to slow things down and play out from the back, and a good run of form followed, but it was too little too late. Over the course of a season, the club managed to win just 10 games from 42, losing 20 and drawing 12. With 2 games of the season to go, United were 21st, 3 points from safety. On the 27th of April 1974, United's first relegation in 36 years was sealed in the cruelest of ways. Nearly 57,000 spectators gathered at the Old Trafford Stadium, and they watched on as United and City cancelled each other out for over an hour, when City's Francis Lee broke through the United defence. He crossed the ball from the edge of the box to Denis Law, who was waiting in the centre, and Law backheeled the ball past United goalkeeper Alex Stepney. After the game, Law stated that he hadn't felt so depressed in his life, and even 30 years after scoring that infamous goal, he still admits he is haunted by it. Manager Tommy Docherty stayed on for the next season, which would be spent in the second tier, and immediately moved on all the remaining players from the Busby era except for goalkeeper Stepney. New signings like Stuart Pearson and young players who had shown promise last season, like Sammy McElroy, were going to be the squad's new core. The similarities to United's modern-day woes end at the behavior of their fans. However, instead of acting like petulant children and either criticizing the club at every step or being as deluded as a certain man who has certainly visited Nigeria many times, United's fans of 1974 rallied around their club, and Old Trafford's attendances actually increased in the second tier. The atmosphere around the club back then was starkly different from the one nowadays. Most fans loved Tommy Docherty, and even the owners, the Edwards family, were viewed favourably. As the next season went underway, United won their first 4 games on the trot and were unbeaten in their first 9. Despite 7 defeats, mostly coming during the middle part of the season, United finished strongly on a run of 11 unbeaten games, and Lou Macari sealed the club's promotion with his goal against Southampton on April 15, 1975. This form carried over into their first season back into the top flight, and many were actually tipping them to become only the third side to win the league after promotion. Ultimately, a third place finish, just 4 points off champions Liverpool, and an FA Cup final loss to Southampton was the best that team could manage, which is still incredibly impressive for a newly promoted side. The 1977 season would bring two massive developments to United's fortunes, namely their first trophy in 9 years, and the sacking of Tommy Docherty, who had been the architect of United's revival. His affair with the wife of one of the club's physios garnered immense negative attention from the press, and the club decided to sack him for this offense. The FA Cup win had come after a 2-1 win against Liverpool in the final, thus preventing their most hated rivals from completing a treble that season. But Docherty's sacking was a huge blow to the club. His replacement, Dave Sexton, could only muster a second place finish behind Liverpool in 1980, who were probably the best team in Europe at the time, and the lost FA Cup against Arsenal 1 year prior. Ron Atkinson came in at the end of the 1981 season and brought in Brian Robson from West Bromwich Albion for £1.5 million, which was a British record at the time. His two FA Cup wins, in 1983 against Brighton and in 1985 against last season's champions Everton, were overshadowed by an inability to consistently compete for the title in the league. His sacking in 1986 paved the way for Alex Ferguson to take the club to its greatest ever performances, becoming arguably the greatest manager of all time in the process. After hearing this story and seeing United's rebirth, I want to know from you, can the club go on to bigger and better things, or are they doomed to Premier League mediocrity for the foreseeable future, or are they gonna get relegated? As always, I want to read your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe with notifications on, since YouTube never forgets to play a million ads, but always forgets to recommend my videos to my subscribers. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.